Evening, everybody. Nice to see you. Anybody raining out your way at all? No? Certainly raining out my way it was. So I don't have anything particular to say other than that the world has seen too many aeroplane accidents for my liking just recently. And nothing's happening here much in Australia, thank goodness. A few reports have been released from older accidents, but nothing we didn't really know already. Anyway, Denis is getting tired of standing there doing nothing, so I'd like to introduce him to talk. You should know him quite well. He's not the first rodeo, as they say, for Denis, and he wants to talk to us about and explain the IKARA, which was a rather large item, as I recall.
Yes.
All right, all yours.
Thank you very much. Good evening, gentlemen and ladies online. A little bit of background, first of all. So I started at CAC in 1971 as a cadet engineer and rapidly moved into the test department, which ended up in the flight hangar, the Butler hangar at CAC. And in that hangar, towards the end of my time, was a complete IKARA installation that was used for training. And I hadn't realised the significance of IKARA during that 20 years, or over 20 years that I was at CAC. So I wanted to explore it all again and cover a little bit more about it. So that's my background. Ground and flight test engineer on helicopters, P3s, Macchies, those sort of things as well. All right, so on the screen we have a really nice sketch or drawing of the IKARA on its trolley on the way to the launcher. And that drawing, I need to acknowledge that, it comes from the book by Brian Hill, We're Away to Horner, which I had a lot to do with the writing of. I collected a lot of the information for Brian to put that book together for the then CAC team. What I'd like to cover is a few things there, 6 things to do with the development of the IKARA. So post-World War II, Australia assisted in the development of the British Malkara wide-guide anti-tank missile, and that was a key project just after the war that GAF got involved in the late 1940s and early 50s. And then out of that, GAF and ARL got together to propose the IKARA, an anti-submarine missile that carried a homing torpedo to attack submarines. But out of all of the process of developing Malkara and IKARA, we ended up with the Weapons Research Establishment and the Woomera range that a lot of you are familiar with. And it was that particular group. They were brought together and they were given the task of developing the ship guidance system. CAC were tasked with designing the handling equipment and magazine on the ship, including the launcher. And the team got together, and after looking at all current torpedoes, homing torpedoes, they selected the US developed Mark 44 torpedo as the British Mark 31-30 was basically obsolete at that particular time. Out of those contributors, one of the key persons to bring together the team in this development was the country's chief scientist, Dr. William Buttermint. And an absolute, when you read his history, quite an amazing story about what he did for defence in Australia and brought people together. So he was based within the Department of Supply at that particular time. Also, Alan Sharp, the senior research scientist at Aeronautical Research Labs, he was another mover and shaker in the development of systems like this, radio-controlled, monitored machines and weapons. Another great supporter of developing this was Senator John Gorton, Minister for Navy, and John Gorton became Prime Minister eventually. Another one was Vice Admiral Burrell, Chief of Naval Staff. And then we had great companies that came together under the Chief Scientist, EMIE, AWA, who developed radar, sonar, and then eventually sonar buoys. And I was heavily involved in the Barra sonar buoy with EMIE and AWA as well. So these all were all brought together to develop the IKARA and many other missile systems. So what is an IKARA? Again, like many of our weapon systems, we tend to give them Aboriginal names. So IKARA stands for throwing stick because it carried a torpedo. And the idea was to deliver a homing torpedo to the target, which was either most commonly a Russian submarine. It used the Mark 44 torpedo, which was a semi-recessed in the missile body. So if we look at that area here, that's the torpedo in under the body of the missile. So a unique thing was the torpedo was not mounted in the nose like a lot of weapon systems. It was dropped from the IKARA missile once it got out to its location that the sonar in the ship had detected and directed the IKARA to get out to there. And then the torpedo was released and it had a stabilising parachute that ensured that the weapon entered the water at the correct angle and the right sort of speed so it wouldn't damage anything. And then the parachute was released. The torpedo then homed into its pattern, circular pattern of tracking down the submarine. So the timeline. In the late 40s, the country was advised to specialise in guided weapons, and that came from both British direction and the chief scientist. So in 47, the Woomera Range was established. Salisbury and Melbourne labs were created, all contributing together to work on these guided weapons. 49 teams were assembled, British collaboration began, and around that time, one of the projects that leading into the IKARA was the development of the Jindovic drone. And a lot of you know of the Jindovic, a command control guided weapon that was used for target work with the Navy and shore-based facilities. In February 61, all this worked together, finalised the fact that the possibility of building a rocket-powered missile to carry torpedo was factual, and so they developed a 1/6 scale missile for trials at Woomera, and that missile was carried under fairy fireflies under the wing and sea venoms for early trials. And apparently there's some very good video on the War Memorial site, and I wasn't able to get access that in time for this. Then in 61 to 62, they carried out full-size trials, and out of the 14 trials, 9 were successes, 5 were failures, but that gave good preparation and understanding that they had a system. The first Australian vessel that was going to be fitted with the IKARA system, HMAS Stuart, began sea trials in 63, originally planned for 62, but because of the early trials, that was delayed. And then they went into 63 for live missile launches off Bundaberg. And north of Bundaberg is the Fairfax Islands, or their shoals, and that's where the trials were carried out. Here we have a shot of the IKARA launch facility with the missile installed. That's on the Stuart. But the ships that were identified to be fitted with IKARA included the Charles F. Adams class destroyers, HMAS Perth, Hobart and Brisbane, and they had twin launches so that you could fire multiple weapons really quickly. Then the frigates were the River class frigates, and they were a smaller vessel, and they were HMAS Stuart, Yarra and Swan and Torrens. You can see here retrofitted post-delivery, and that was all carried out at Williamstown Dockyard in Melbourne. On the Stuart, it was a retrofit as well, whereas Swan and Torrens had the original equipment fitted during the shipbuilding. We also, because of the connection with the British in setting up weapons WRE at Salisbury and ARL, we then sold the system to the Royal Navy, and 8 of their Leander class frigates were fitted with IKARA. So they were a smaller ship, and they were built, and then the IKARA conversions were fitted in England. They all had a single launcher installation, but they also had a Vickers built handling system, not a CAC handling system, and it was heavier than the CAC system because they used conventional naval hydraulics, whereas CAC used aero hydraulics. So the CAC design system was much smaller and therefore lighter. The ships were HMS Ajax, Erythra, Aurora, Dido, Euryalus, Galatea, Leander and Naiad. And you can see the missile launcher on the aft deck of the ship there in that class. We also approached other navies to look at fitting the system to, and Brazilian Navy came on board because they were buying a Vosper Thornycroft design frigate, and they were fitted with a single launcher again. And so they were this Neterio class frigate, and you see the dates there when they were built. Some of the interesting things about that system was the 4th installation was lost at sea in the Tasman Sea after leaving Melbourne. And so the CAC had to rapidly rebuild a complete new kit to go into the ship. And at that time, Roger Lee, who was a very well-known engineer within our team, he was dispatched to Brazil to do the initial setup. But then because of the delay, the loss of that system, he had to come home to Melbourne and wait for 3 months before going back to Brazil for the final installation. But the company were very pleased because we got another complete new system out of the whole process. So early trials off Bundaberg. There were 14 launch trials and 9 successful launches. So as I said, the location was the Fairfax Island Reef, directly north of Bundaberg. I think it's about 40 or 50 kilometres. As you can see on the screen, the torpedo drop was out to 17,000 yards, and then the missile continued on, and we had a naval recovery ship that then picked up the missile when it finally came down, and they brought it back. 2 of the first 3 launches failed, and they had to then work out what had happened. So in investigation, they found that the rear fin, so here, which was where a lot of the electronics were and where the control systems were for flying the aircraft, they found swarf in the pitch and roll amplifiers in the fin. So there was mad rush on board to clean those out, and when they investigated other fins, they found all of them were affected that way. The 3rd launch then became a direct hit on the island target. So that's what then led to the ongoing testing in Woomera and development of the system. So it was very successful, and I'm told there is 1 or 2 test missiles out there off Fairfax Island because they didn't recover them all. Here we have a picture of a model of the scale model of the missile. So trials and training. The nation used Fleet Air Arm aircraft, the Fairey Firefly and the Sea Venom to carry scale missile models for tracking trials. And the tracking trials occurred out of Avalon and Corio Bay and Port Phillip Bay, RAF Edinburgh, and up to Woomera Airfield. Another fascinating thing about the trials was they built a complete magazine and assembly area and placed it at Port Wakefield Army Proving Ground, and then had dummy missiles inside the whole lot and fired weapons, a .5 calibre weapon into the rocket motor to see whether it would set off the whole magazine. It didn't, but interesting trials that people got up to. And if you've been out to Port Wakefield, which I have, fascinating place for proving weapons. HMAS Kimbler served as a dedicated missile recovery vessel during the sea trials. HMAS Stewart loaded live missiles at Williamstown, Melbourne, before sailing to Bundaberg. And in between, when they had failures, she had to then sail back to Melbourne, load up again, and then go back. So the trials were very extensive. Civilian engineers and scientists were aboard HMAS Stewart, which developed great camaraderie between the teams and the Navy. Another good thing that's very important in trials and training. Now, in the early days of this project and development, the chief scientist approached the Americans for funding to help in this development because they were hoping that America would take on board the IKARA, because the Americans had the ASROC system, and out of that, at a very late stage in the early development, when funding within Australia was becoming very tight, the Americans gave the nation £4 million for early development. So, and then out of all that, our country bought torpedoes off the Americans. The legacies were we developed world-class missile testing range at Woomera. We had fantastic research facilities in Salisbury, South Australia, a foundation for future programs. We also, out of that, developed the GAF Turana target drone, which was unfortunately not continued. They built 23 of those and they were used by the RAM. But some of this work also led through to the Barra Sonar Buoy and the AQS 901 Sonics processor that ended up in our P3 Orions. Ship sonar was developed. Radar was helped to be developed through this activity. We also, out of it, produced a great generation of very experienced defence scientists and engineers. And I feel all that foundation led to some of the work that we now see with Boeing Australia and its GHOSTBAT or Loyal Wingman activities. So very, very long legacy things. Here's the airfield at CAC in the very early days. This is about 1945, and that's the flight hangar or the Butler hangar. And in that hangar, there was a complete installation of the IKARA missile handling system and magazine, including a launcher. And Navy people used to come there for training. And as I said, when I started in 71, all this was going on, and I hadn't recognised the importance of all that. But I did get to actually work in the complete assembly and watch that happening. And from my understanding, that complete training facility moved to HMAS Cerberus down south of Melbourne, a great training naval base. But all my inquiries have not been able to find what happened to that complete facility. But it was a very, very good facility. Now, some of the references that I came across to help me put this all together was the one on the left, which is a great one written by Angus Britz, part of the Naval Historical Society of Australia. You can purchase that online for, I think, $10 or $11 to be a downloadable file. Fabulous document, really fabulous document. The other one was Wirraway to Hornet by Brian Hill. As I said at the start, I helped Brian with a lot of the CAC information that I'd collected in the archive. And there's a nice little summary in his book about the IKARA. So I'll leave it at that at this stage. I do have something that I want to show you. Out the front here, we have a model of the complete IKARA system. You ready to do that, Peter? Shouldn't. So I have to say thanks to Moorabbin Aircraft Museum CEO, Ashley Briggs. He regularly travels up to our part of the country from down in Moorabbin, and he brought this up for me. So here we have a complete system. So we have a magazine. You can see missiles sitting in the mounts. And then this is the assembly area. And what I'm going to do is take the top off this unit so that we can play with it a little bit. So the missile was loaded down through the top here. So it was put on top deck, brought up here and slung down into the loading dock. Now, because this unit is so old, some of the blast doors have come away in transit. But again, this particular system has the missiles mounted on the floor of the magazine. Some of the ships had them slung overhead, and it was a complete difference. So if you're reading documents and looking at photos of the system, you'll see that difference. So what we have here is a missile can go, I'll move this one out of the way, so they can come across and they got picked up, put into this central position. So there was a blast door between the magazine and the assembly area. And then there were blast doors out the front here. As I said, they've come off due to its age. And then there was a loading assembly. So the launcher was brought around. And then the missile, well, in the assembly area, let me just put a few things on. There was a sailor on this side and sailor on this side. So one installed a wing. Let me just find the wing hole. Like that. And then the fin with the little antenna. Went on like that. And then the missile came out into the launcher. And then the ramp came up, the doors closed, the blast doors closed, and then they would do tracking from the sonar. And this launcher could angle up to 55 degrees, and the low level, I think, was 25 degrees, and then fire off. So quite a fascinating thing. So over here we had the hydraulic room. Let me just... So hydraulic room in there. And as I said, it was based on aircraft hydraulics. So they were much lighter than normal ship's hydraulics. Substantial weight reduction. And then in here, once the sailors did their loading and the unit was up in the launcher, they would then come into this control area. Their doors would then close and they would lock up, and then they'd go through the firing sequence. So quite a fantastic thing, and all within the ship structure.
What was the rate of fire if they considered in the assembly?
It was, they had a something like 3 minutes. They had to be able to fire the next missile. Yeah. Yeah. So it's pretty fast for that time. Yeah. And again, all of that, as I said, the Naval Historical Society's article, if you want to read the real detail about the systems that came into place to make this, this is the document to read. And you can just download it. It's 283 pages or something like that. Right? But really good reading, yeah. So at that stage, Peter, any questions?
So much could go wrong. Very complex.
Thank you. So where was the missile, the torpedoes attached to the missile in the assembly process? That CAC, was it, or where?
No, the GAF.
Yeah.
Yeah, GAF put the whole missile together,
Mm-hmm.
and then they were then delivered to Williamstown, which is in Melbourne.
Yep.
The old dockyard, and loaded into the ship by that overhead method, down onto the ramps and then back into the magazine.
So every ship had to go to Williamstown to be loaded up.
Yes. Yep. Oh, maybe Navy ended up having stocks around the country. I would think that would probably be the most logical thing to do.
The torpedo, is that the same as the airborne torpedo, the Orion and things like that?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah.
That early Mark 40.
Common.
Yeah.
Yep, torpedo. No, that's good.
Is that weapon system still in use?
No, it ceased in the early 90s.
Did Harpoon replace
No,
IKARA?
Harpoon is air to surface.
Oh, right.
Yeah, not
Yeah.
subsurface.
What was the magazine capacity in the ships?
Um,
And by that
That-
scale
no,
one, it's about 24 or something.
This scale one says 24. It was all classified at the time. So, yeah, you probably find it now. But, yeah, that's that one there. And Stuart, I believe, had less because the overhead storage took up more space for some reason. But it's a matter of reading and searching that. I didn't go down to that level.
Denis, cost of the system. It seems expensive if you're going to ditch something
No,
that flies.
overall it wasn't. It wasn't costly. Yeah, when you add it to the ship.
Yes, the capital cost of the
Yeah.
ship. Yeah.
So, all the structure around was already designed into the ship.
Yeah.
So it was a matter of building the systems, fitting in the hydraulics, and then the electronic control systems back up to radars and antennas and things like
That's
that.
right.
But if you design it all in,
interface.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah, it just becomes a substantial part of the vessel's cost.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I couldn't find any detail that drilled down to that. Yeah. Right.
Another comment, having got all this equipment made and proved and that sort of thing, it's no longer in use. Did they decide that it wasn't worth having after all, or some other particular reason that they no longer have it?
Other systems came in. Yeah. 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 So we had helicopters with dipping sonar and dropping torpedoes or depth charges. We had maritime patrol aircraft that carried torpedoes, depth charges, sonar buoys, and they had extensive range. But at the time this was designed, this had the best range of anything that was around compared to the Americans, the British, the French, and those sort of things. So we were all hoping that this would then end up in many navies and fight the Russians, because that was the critical enemy at the time. Yeah.
So having designed it, built it and tested it, was it ever used in combat?
Not that I know of. No.
Oh, did the Russians have an equivalent?
Not that, again, I don't know. Yeah.
They
I
didn't
didn't-
tell us.
One of the problems with the Russian is they had double skinned submarines. So the torpedo had to penetrate the outer skin and then without, using its energy and then get through the second skin. So a very difficult thing. And the British torpedo, the Mark 30 and 31, just didn't have the speed and the power to do that sort of thing. So that's why they selected the American torpedo.
Sorry if you already answered this question and I missed it, but I was just wondering, did they have a way of getting the main body back? Did it have some way of tracking back to the original ship, or did they just remake it completely?
No, once it did its circuit of looking for the submarine, it had a timer in it and it would just sink if it didn't get the submarine. Okay? So, yeah.
There are a lot of these sitting on.
Possibly. Possibly. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Happy with that?
Yeah. Thank you very much.